Hi, my name is Saul Benton Cohn, and I changed my name when I moved to California to S. Robert Benton. So whenever anybody asked me what was my name before I changed it, I was always a Benton. What can I say? I was born on May 19th, 1932 in Denver, Colorado. And when I was 2 years old, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska. And we've lived there since I graduated in 1950 from Central High School. And that's when shortly thereafter, I went into the Air Force.
Now I want to hear about your mother and dad.
I lived in South Omaha with my mother and dad. My father's name was Sam Harry Cohn, and my mother was named Molly Cohn. And I had a sister who was 3 years younger than myself. In fact, our birthdays were on the same day. So she was born 3 years after I was born. And then I had a stepsister who lived in California by the name of Claire. And I had a stepbrother who was in the Air Force also. He was in World War II, and his name was Sam Carr, because my mother was previously married, as was my father.
Did your parents immigrate to the United States?
Yeah, they immigrated from Russia. My mother coming with my older brother, and my father coming with the older sister. And my father moved to Denver, Colorado, and my mother moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa, to live with her sister, Sarah Cutler, who later moved to Omaha. And the Cutlers took care of her, and then they wanted her to get married, so they elicited a marriage broker who sent my mother to Denver, Colorado, where she met my father, and shortly thereafter they were married, and shortly thereafter I was born, and then when they moved to Omaha, my sister was born.
How did your dad end up going to Denver? Did he have family there?
No, he opened up a candy store, and he was also a cantor. So on the side he was a cantor, and he operated a candy store in Denver.
Then when he came back to Omaha, what kind of work was he doing?
Then he did cantoring full time, and also beside being a Hasen, as they called the cantor, he also was a shul official. You know, he'd take care of the grounds for the temple or the church or the synagogue, and he would do other kinds of work, such as sheched. In other words, he was good with the knife, and he was also a moil, so he took care of new baby births.
What are some of your memories of growing up in Omaha?
They were all happy memories. My sister liked Omaha when she lived there, but when she left Omaha, she didn't care to return. I did. And when I was in the service, whenever I had a furlough, I would manage to go visit the Cutlers when I was on furlough in their area. And in fact, I was, one of my cousins, Saul Cutler, who's a dentist there, got married in Savannah, Georgia, and I went down to that wedding too. So I always loved Omaha, and I always have happy thoughts about it. And I went to Central High School there, and so I went back for my 50th anniversary. Not too many people remembered S. Robert Benton, but a lot of people did remember Saul Cohn.
Tell me about all your relatives in Omaha. Can you tell me about them, name them?
Okay, I had several relatives because my mother had 5 sisters. One of the sisters died very young, but we were part of the Molnick family. They were also called Yarmolnick, and the boys changed their name to Molnick. And so there were 3 brothers there that were Molnicks, and they lived in Omaha and died in Omaha. They spent their full life in Omaha.
Do you remember their names, their first names?
Ben Molnick was the youngest one. Harry Molnick was the middle one, and Phil Molnick was the older one. And in fact, there was a picture of him in one of the retirement homes that showed him in his uniform, because he was in World War II and he was a pilot at that time. I was always proud of the Molnicks. They were very hardworking people. And then there were the Kramers. Esther Kramer married a guy in Des Moines, Iowa, named Mel Gavant, and she and her sister moved to Des Moines, and they still live in Des Moines, but they come back to Omaha to visit quite often, and they have 3 children, and it's 2 boys and a girl. Oh, it's 2 girls and 2 boys. I'm sorry, my mistake. And well, we don't see them too often. And then we were also relatives to the Abramsons. And Morris Abramson, who's from Omaha, lives out here in Southern California. And he's a cousin that we see once in a while. And then there were the Bombers, Saul and Esther and Lowell Bomber. Esther lives here in Southern California. Saul, I don't know where he lives, and Lowell has passed away. And the mother, of course, all the aunts and my mother have passed away along with my father. My father was a cantor who was killed in a robbery, and they still have articles that appear in Omaha once in a while in the newspaper saying who killed Cantor Cone, because they never found the killer.
Growing up, what grade schools did you go to?
I went to, in South Omaha, I lived in South Omaha most of my growing up years, and I didn't go to South High, I did go to Central. I used to take the bus and the trolley car all the way to Omaha, from South Omaha, to go to Central High. I don't know how we got away with not having to go to South High, but we got away with it. I was always lucky. And when I think about it, when I was in grade school, I was always a safety patrol officer. So I always wanted to be a policeman when I was young too. So I later on fulfilled my wish when I moved to California here.
Tell me about that.
Well, when I was living here in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area, one year I decided I wanted to be a volunteer police officer. And the only place I could really get a position would be with a police department called the City of San Fernando Police Department. So I went down there and applied, and they accepted me. They said that I would have to go to school for 9 months, weekends only, and Wednesday night, in order to pass the exam. And so I went to an academy. It was the Sheriff's Academy for the city of Los Angeles. And I went there, and for 9 months, and I often said, what the heck am I doing here? Going through all this rigmarole. I had to go to training, I had to go to classes, I had to go to workshops. I was really worn out by the time I graduated. But when I did graduate, I worked my way up through the ranks. Within a year, I was a corporal, which is a senior officer. Within 2 years, I was a sergeant. And within 4 years, I was a lieutenant. And I was with the department for 32 years. And during those 32 years, the highest rank you could make was lieutenant, except for chief. I never made chief, but I stayed lieutenant. And I became an active regular officer in the reserve system.
What were some of your experiences?
Many, many experiences. I never shot anybody, and nobody ever shot at me. Some people aimed a gun at me, but nobody ever shot me. One time we interrupted a crime in action. It was a rape scene, and I was the first one there at the scene. I was so nervous and so excited that I turned on my flashlight on a bunch of guys who were molesting a girl. And when I turned on my light, I said, "Don't move or I'll shoot your head off." I didn't even have my hand on my gun. I had my hand on my flashlight. But they couldn't see past the flashlight, so it was, there were a lot of other miscellaneous things that too numerous to mention, but I really enjoyed this. This isn't how I made my living, however. So even though it was a lot of fun all those years, and I hated to retire, it was time when you get a little too old to take all the training tests, because every month you had to pass a gun test, and if you don't pass the test, you really couldn't wear a certain little badge. It was called a shooter's badge. And so I didn't like not wearing a shooter's badge, so I used to have to train extra hard, and it was getting harder as I got older.
Let's go back and you tell me what happened right after you graduated high school.
Right after I graduated high school, I went into, I moved to Kansas City for about 6 months, and then I enlisted in the Air Force. I remember my uncle, Harry Cutler, who was from Council Bluffs, told me, "You should never do that, don't do that." And ironically enough, his son, Saul Cutler, enlisted in the Air Force shortly thereafter I did. So it wasn't that we didn't listen to our elders, it's just that we thought it was a good thing, and it was a good thing. I got some excellent training. I was in there for over 3 years, and when the Korean War ended, I got out. While I was in there, I had enlisted in the to become a bombardier, and I was going to school, and the Korean War ended, and I resigned my potential commission and took an early release. Meanwhile, my mother had moved to Los Angeles along with my sister, and so when I got my discharge, I moved to Los Angeles.
What was your job then finally in the Air Force for the most time?
Most of the time I was a personnel sergeant. I did the hiring and firing for air police and for cooks. In other words, we assigned people to the jobs. Whether they were a cook or not, if we needed a cook, they became a cook. And so my job was to assign people those positions. And if they weren't a good cook, out they went and became a air police. So it was quite an interesting position until I went in to become a bombardier. A navigator. And
after you got out of the Air Force, what was your life's path?
well, after I got out of the Air Force, I went and I bought a nursery school.
Where was that?
What was that nursery?
Where? Where was it located?
In Los Angeles. And I bought the nursery school because I was going to college to study teaching. And I thought this was a good income, and I had my discharge money, and I just used it as a down payment for the school. And while I owned the school, I met my future wife, who helped me run the school along with 6 other employees who ran the school. It was a good-sized nursery school, and I took to it quite easy. It didn't require any previous experience on my part because I sort of did like on-job training.
What were some of your experiences with the kids?
Well, the kids were all young. I remember one year a kid came in to the school, and I told his mother he couldn't come to class. She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because I think he has the mumps." And she says, "Oh, you're kidding me." I said, "No, he looks like he has the mumps." She says, "Well, you see that Cadillac out front? That's my prized possession. I'll bet you that Cadillac against your school that he doesn't have the mumps." I said, "Okay, you're covered." And so about 2 hours later, I get a call, and she says, "Do you want me to deliver it, or do you come in to pick it up?" Of course, I didn't get it, but anyway, I was just a lucky guess that the kid was contagious. there were a lot of other stories like that. But we learned how to handle kids by doing, and that I think contributed a lot to my raising my own 4 kids, which I later had after I got married, of course. And so we were very lucky that we were experienced parents. At least we had about 40 kids to learn from that we were able to pass on.
Did you stay with that school very long?
I stayed with the school for over 2 years, and then I sold it as a going business. And then I bought another business. I bought a metal fabrication business in which we made TV tables and TV stands and TV mounters. So I was a partner in that. I had an older gentleman as my partner. And that business I bought after I had gotten married. And my father-in-law was instrumental in getting me into that business because he knew the owner of the business and they needed a partner. And I had some schooling in administrative and knew how to handle books. So I became the bookkeeper.
And how long were you with that?
That I was with a little over a year. And then I wanted to go into the import business. So I asked my father-in-law at that time. He was in the finance business, and so I asked him if he knew anybody in the import business. He said yes, he did. And he talked to the owner of the import company, and the guy hired me. And I started working in the warehouse, and then he moved me up to the showroom. Then he moved me into sales, and he moved me into office, and then he moved me into a traveling salesman, and then I became assistant buyer to the president. And then I asked him if I could buy into the company. He said, well, I'm going to buy a couple other companies out. If I buy this one company out, I'll let you buy in a partnership into it. So I said, okay, that sounds good. I waited about 6 months more, and he bought the company. And I said, now can I buy the partnership? He says, no, I'm not ready to sell it. I said, well, if I can't buy it, then I'm going to quit and start my own company. And he said, you'll never do it. You'll never make it. I said, yes, I will. He said, no, you won't. It takes lots of money. And I know you don't have lots of money. Well, lucky enough, we befriended a lot of our people in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and they financially backed me. And we became a big success, and the company was in existence for over 30 years. And we made, I don't say that we made a lot of money, but we made a good living. But the thing that made us more money was that we always needed warehouse space. So I kept buying these buildings that later became very valuable. So we sold off a lot of the buildings, and that's where we made our money.
And how long have you been away from that business?
I left the business in '97. In fact, my children who worked in the business didn't want to run the business anymore either. So we liquidated the business. We just sold off all the assets, but the business is still, in name only, a California corporation. And so I keep that corporation because it finances, or it must be the parent to my pension plan, which finances my retirement and will finance some of my children's retirements when they retire.
That had to be quite an experience, doing a lot of traveling internationally to buy.
Yeah, we travel to Hong Kong at least 3 times a year, and sometime from Hong Kong we go into China, and sometime we go to Taiwan and then Japan and Korea, and then a couple of years we went to Europe, but we didn't have the success with Europe that we wanted, so we didn't import from there. We did try Costa Rica one time, and believe it or not, I had the trouble with the language going to Costa Rica, and never had the trouble with the language going to China, because most of the Chinese that we dealt with all spoke perfect English. And in Costa Rica, Spanish was prevalent. So when I brought my wife one year, she spoke a little Spanish, so we made some contacts, but we didn't stick with Costa Rica as a supplier.
What were some of the materials you would import?
We imported mainly toys and novelties, all the low-end stuff for carnivals and carnival supply houses, and we used to sell all over the country. Wasserman in Omaha used to be one of our customers, and Oriental Trading in those days bought from us too, until they became much bigger, and then they supplied us. But we took on a license with Larry Harmon, who was the owner of Bozo and Laurel and Hardy, and because of that license, I later enrolled as a Bozo the Clown, where I worked part-time and making appearances for Larry Harmon as Bozo the Clown. Nobody knew the difference who was under that mask, but under that makeup rather. And but I made a lot of products under the Bozo name, and we operated nationally with the Bozo Party Favors and other little toy novelties that we sold around the country, and even to foreign countries.
And you went around as Bozo quite a bit?
Yes, I did, with the big red nose and the size 18 shoes. The shoes were custom made for me. I don't wear an 18. In fact, I wear a size 9, which is probably small for a person that's 6 foot like myself. But it was interesting, and I had a lot of fun. I traveled all over the United States doing Bozo appearances, while traveling all over the country and all over the world doing the import business. And as a matter of fact, one of the going jokes was when I was a police officer, when I first came onto the department, I had already been a licensed Bozo for a number of years, and everybody, the police officers used to say, I don't want to ride with that Bozo, meaning myself. But after I became lieutenant, they changed their tune.
What are some of your memories of AZA in Omaha?
Well, you know, I told you I was a member of AZA 100, but at one time I was a member of AZA 1 also. And I remember the two being intertwined, and I'm trying to recall who was in what AZA and who was in the other AZA. And I remember specifically that my cousin Philip Abramson was in AZA 1. And he always wanted me to be in AZA 1 with him, but I was in AZA 100 at that time. And I seem to remember a guy by the name of Belgrade. I remember that name just off the top of my head. And he was in AZA 100, and he wanted me to stay. And I don't know, I kept wibbly wobbly between the two, that I don't remember exactly which one was the best, but they were both good AZAs, and I was always proud to be in both AZAs. They were.
What was your social life like in high school?
Socially, I was more shy about girls, but we went with the BBGs were a group that we frequented, and my cousin Philip took me with. He was a cousin to Maxine Abramson, who was a very popular girl at that time. She was, you know, all the dances that they had at Peony Park, she was a sweetheart in the Sweetheart Ball and all those things. So I got good coverage of those things, but I was still very shy in high school. Of course, we lived in South Omaha, and in the early days, my only transportation getting around was the bus and the trolley. But then eventually I got a car. It was a 1944 DeSoto, and then I started traveling. But that was in my senior year, and so I became a little bit more popular because a car will do it for you.
Did you work during your high school years?
Yes, I did. I was the cashier at the Central High cafeteria. I was a cashier during all 4 years of my years at high school. And I made good money there, and I became very good at when you come through the line. You know, it'd be 25 cents, it'd be 35 cents, it'd be 75 cents. I knew those figures just off the top of my head. It was just so easy. So everybody started to be nice to me because they didn't want me to overcharge them. And so it was a good position to be in. Also, I was in the makeup department of school, and one year, my senior year, I was voted best actor. I had nothing to do with acting. I was in the acting department because I was doing the makeup. But since I was the only visible person in the acting department, they made me best act. I was voted best actor, but I really wasn't an actor. I did very little in acting.
So your memories of Central High were pretty good.
Always good. I remember Central High as being the greatest high school. In fact, a Newsweek came out this week that said 100 best high schools in the country. And I was very disappointed to find Central wasn't in that list, because I really think they are the best. And I was Omaha really brings back such good memories. And when I think of Omaha, all the people, I can't remember all the names, but every once in a while, I look through old papers and everything, and I talked to my sister, Ann, who also came to Los Angeles from Omaha, and she remembers a lot of the names, and so she rattles off a bunch of names, but she was 3 years younger than me, so the names don't always coordinate.
Now, your sister, you mentioned Ann, do you see her very often?
I see her about once a month. I talk to her about once a week, and she lives in a city that's about 30 miles from me, and so she comes out here for lunch, or we'll go into the city for lunch with her.
Does she have children?
She have what?
Children.
Yes, she does. She has 2 boys, and Tony and Stephen. They both don't live at home. Stephen lives in San Francisco, and in the San Francisco area now, and Tony lives in Washington, and Tony's in the law business. He works in a law office. He's not a lawyer, and Stephen is in the electronics business, and he travels a lot. He travels to France. In fact, his travels to France took him there so often that's where he's met his wife, and he got married and has one child and lives in the San Francisco area.
So Annie has one grandchild?
Yeah, Annie has only one grandchild, and it's a she. She is the cutest little thing you ever saw, and in fact, behind you is a wall of pictures. She's somewhere in those pictures.
Now, how was growing up raising your children?
Well, when we had our first one, Scott, who lives here in Newbury Park, not too far from here, he was a lover. Girls liked him very much, and he always was. When he was in high school, he was busy all the time. There were girls calling here all the time. But when he was growing up, I remember changing his diaper. I still remember that. I used to call him poo-poo pants, because he really needed changing all the time. But I used to change it. My wife thought it was unusual for a husband in those days to be the changer. But when I was in the nursery school business, I also had to change many there too, so it wasn't unusual. But we lived in a time when the implication of sexual harassment was not a predominant factor. And probably if it was, I wouldn't have lived the life I lived and acted the way I did. Then my second son came along 3 years later. Stuart was was an ambitious little kid. In fact, one time I had a guitar, and we gave him a recorder. He took the recorder completely apart, screw by screw, every piece completely, without breaking anything. And he was going to reassemble it inside the guitar, but he couldn't figure out how to open the guitar to reassemble it inside there. So I took the recorder back to the manufacturer and I said, could this be put back together again? He says, I don't have a technician that's capable of even taking it apart the way you took it apart, let alone put it back together again. So Stuart had the genius for electronics, and so when he grew up, he kept that genius. He went into the auto alarm business, and he installed auto alarms, and he never took any training. He just knew how to do it. I don't know how he knew how to do it. And now he has a business. He installs house alarms, he installs all kinds of electronic devices, he installs telephones, he does new construction and everything, and he lives in Denver, Colorado, and he has 2 children. Molly is his 4-year-old, and Sammy is his 2-year-old. And they look like they might take after Stuart. So we'll have some more electricians. But Stuart's wife is a pilot, and she flies out of Denver. And Stuart was a pilot for a while too, but he likes the electronics business better.
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you, I got 2 others.
I want to hear about them.
Okay. The other, Beth is my number 3 child. She lives in Arizona, Snowflake, Arizona to be exact, which is a cold area. And she works for the district attorney there. She always liked working in law enforcement, mainly because I had worked in law enforcement, I think, because she liked law enforcement. And she likes doing the kind of work. She works in the office, though, and she likes working for the district attorney. She handles the department for deadbeat dads. But she has a son, Jacob, who's 7 years old, and her husband is the general manager of the bus company in that area, and they live pretty happily up there and quietly. It's not a busy area. And then there's Lori. Lori lives right here in Newbury Park also, with her husband. Her husband works for Arbitron, which is a company that does radio research. And he works out of the house, and she works for Craft Services, which is a union that handles the services and show business, for TV programs and for movie shows. But she works in the TV industry, where they prepare the food and the snacks and for the actors and the standbys. And so she likes that work, and she's been doing that for quite some time. Prior to that, she was in another union where she was a medic, but she didn't get as much business, so she likes it better as a craft service person.
Do you get to see the kids very often?
We see Lori and her son, Michael. Michael is 3 years old, or he will be 3 next month. We see them at least twice a week. My granddaughters, who also live in Newbury Park, my older son's 2 kids, they're 18 and 16. They're always busy now. My 18-year-old goes to college now, and so she goes to a nearby college, but they're pretty busy, and they also work. So we don't see them but once every 2-3 weeks. My 3rd daughter, we see Jacob from Arizona. He comes in 2 and 3 times a year. So we see them usually 3 times a year. And then Stuart has the 2, a girl and a boy, Sammy and Molly. We see them also about 3 times a year. when they come in or we go up there. This last year, though, we managed to see them 4 or 5 times.
What's going on in your life today?
Today I'm retired. I do volunteer for a local police department. Well, it's not a police department, it's a police patrol situation for the city I live in. I live in a city called Westlake Village, which is a small city of 1,900 people. And it's an upscale city that we have our own patrol car, and we're just the eyes and ears of the police department. There are 10 of us in the department, and I head the group because I have police experience. And we just ride a patrol car around the city to report any crimes or any incidents that the police would be interested in following through on. And people stop us every once in a while to report some insignificant thing like a street light out or something like a cat up the tree. Those important crimes that need to be solved and followed through on, which we do.
Well, between that volunteer police job, how does it fill your entire day?
Well, beside that, I'm also a member of SCORE, which is Senior Corps of Retired Executives. That keeps me busy about 4 days a month. I do counseling at the local chamber for people that are in business or going into business or having business problems or wanting information about business. So there are 30 of us in the organization, and I do it once a week, usually on a Friday. I will do the SCORE counseling, and it'll be anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. Also, I'm a secretary of the organization, so once a month at the meetings I have to take the minutes. Then another organization that we're very active in is square dancing. And we've held every position, every office at least twice now, and so we're still very active in it. In fact, instead of holding a title, my wife, Marilyn, has been given the title of Queen. So she sort of runs the club over the president when they have a problem. And anyway, we still square dance, and we usually go to conventions once a year, and we go to local conventions about 3 or 4 times a year, and then we go to dances a couple times a month, and then we also go to classes where we help new beginners, which is every week.
So all in all, it's been a pleasant life, hasn't it?
A wonderful life. You know, I in fact, ironically enough, I went to see a play, It's a Wonderful Life, just last week. And I kept thinking, you know, other people have had wonderful lives too. And because I thought, maybe I'm the only one that ever had a wonderful life. And it's true. You too can have a wonderful life if you just think happy. And especially if you're from Omaha. That helps.
And you say you do keep in touch with the relatives back in Omaha.
Oh yes, in fact, we talk to Harriet quite often. Harriet Cutler, that is. And we talk to her son, Bruce. And we've talked to the other boys too, but we're closer with Bruce because Bruce lived here in Los Angeles for a while. And he used to stay with us once in a while. So we know Bruce quite well and his family.
You mentioned something about how great it is to be retired.
I think that's the most wonderful thing. In fact, I wake up in the morning and I yell down to my wife, you know, I really like my job. And she laughs and she says, yeah, you don't do anything. But she's wrong. I do everything I want to do. And we manage to go out to nice restaurants. We manage to see a lot of nice people. We manage to keep in touch with a lot of old friends. So it isn't that we're lost. We manage to do, and we travel. We've taken cruises, and we've gone to places all over the country, all over the world. And so our travels weren't only in the business. We also went sightseeing and things like that.
How about on your dad's and on your mother's side of the family? On your dad's, have you found many relatives?
Yes, we went to New Orleans about 10 years ago and discovered my father's nephew and a niece from two different families, from two of his, one from his sister and one from a brother. And then we met another, later on, we met another nephew from a brother. He had 5 brothers, and so, and two sisters. And so they mostly lived in New York, but it turns out that 2 of them had gone down to New Orleans, and then one went to Florida. So that's why we met them. And we learned that my family name was not Cohn, it was Coghlan. And so I don't know, when my father came into the United States, the customs must have thought he said Cohn when he said Coghlan, or everybody that was Jewish that was coming in at that time was given the name Cohn. I don't know what the reason was, but he adopted the name Cohn. In fact, one of his other brothers also had the name Cohn. So I don't know how they got it, whether they both came at the same time from overseas. They came from Russia. And they came from one part of Russia, Kiev. And no, I'm sorry, he came from Odessa. My mother came from Kiev. And actually she came from a little city called Pavlich. Well, Sal Cutler, who lives in Omaha, Dr. Cutler, went to Pavlich to see what it was like, and he found out that it didn't exist anymore. They wiped it completely off the map. So my intentions of going to Pavlich are nil, and I've been to Kiev, so my mother didn't remember anything of Kiev, so she never talked about Kiev. She always talked about Pavlich. I neglected talking to you about my half-brother and half-sister. My half-brother, whose name was Sam Carr, K-A-R-R, it was really originally Karchamsky when he came from Russia. He grew up in Council Bluffs most of the time, and then when they moved to Denver, he had asthma. So Denver was a good place for him to live to cure asthma because of the high altitude. It helped his asthma, evidently. And they lived there, for a couple of years, because that's when I was 2, that's when they moved back to Omaha. Anyway, when he grew up, he went into the Air Force also during World War II, and he was in the Air Force for over 5 years. And he was stationed in Trinidad. And he was, I didn't mention before he went into the Air Force, he graduated from the University of Iowa as a journalist. And so he used to write shows for, he was a ghostwriter for Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy. He was a ghostwriter for that program. And then when he was in the service, he was on radio, and he did a radio show every day, and he wrote the radio show. And so that's what he did while he was in the service. For 5 years he was on radio, broadcasting out of Trinidad to overseas stations, to all the armed forces. And then there was my sister Claire, who, when she came to the United States, she moved to California, and shortly thereafter she got married. She had no children. Oh, by the way, Sam did have children. Sam had 2 boys and a girl. And he married a woman by the name of Claire Blum in Chicago, and after he'd gotten out of the service. And their children, the daughter became a doctor and lives in Oregon. That's where Sam had moved, and that's where he passed away 3 years ago. And then his 2 boys were in the computer business. And one of the boys lives in Washington, and the other boy still lives in Chicago. And then my sister Claire had no children, but she was married to a man named Henry, and Henry passed away shortly thereafter, and she remarried a guy named Lou. And she and Lou lived in Los Angeles, and we became very close with him. Then Lou passed away, and again, Claire married a guy by the name of Irv, and then they both passed away. This is 4 or 5 years ago.
But you've stayed in close contact with them
We stayed in
over the
very
years.
close contact with Claire and Sam, yes. We didn't see Sam as often because he lived up in Oregon and Chicago, but we did see Claire more often because she lived here in Southern California.
And how about, when did you meet Marilyn?
And Marilyn, that's my wife. Her name was Bera, B-A-R-A. She was a Hungarian. So you know Hungarians have tempers. So I was always kept in line because I was afraid she'd throw something at me. But no, she wasn't wild. She moved here from New York in 1950, and I didn't meet her until the end of 53 when I was enrolled in City College. And we had a mutual friend that tried to get us together. And we were always busy. She was a popular girl, and my timing wasn't too good anyway. I was always working, so we never had a chance to go out. But it turns out that both of us applied for a counselor job at a children's camp. And our mutual friend knew this, and he said, when you go to the meeting at the camp, be sure to look up Marilyn because she's going to be a counselor there. In fact, she's been a counselor there before, and here you are, a new counselor. She could probably teach you some good tricks. So we went to the meeting, and I looked up Marilyn. There were about 50 counselors. And I looked up Marilyn, and I said, hi. And she said, hi. I said, I know Normie. She says, oh yeah, you're Normie's friend, aren't you? I said, yeah. That was the last I talked to her until camp started. I didn't say anything else to her. I was too shy, and she was too bashful to talk. But when camp started, we became very good friends, and such good friends that at the end of the season, we got engaged, and within a year we were married, and that's 52 years ago, and we're still married, and I told you we already had 4 kids, and we have 6 grandchildren. So they say it wouldn't last, but I still give it a chance. I want to end this program by saying something to all of my children and all of my grandchildren. First, we'll start with the oldest, Scott, you and your wife, Shelley, and Rachel and Kara. I want you to know something that I'm going to tell all the rest of them. So listen carefully. And then I want to say something to Stuart and to his wife, Jane, and to his daughter, Molly, and to his son, Sammy. And then I'm going to say something to Beth and her husband, Tom, and to their son, Jacob. And then I'm going to say something to Lori and to her husband, Andrew, and then to their son, Michael. I want you all to know one thing that's very, very important. I love you, I've always loved you, and I will continue to love you the rest of the being that you are. And I forgot one very important person. And that person I want her to know is, what is her name? Marilyn. I didn't forget you. I love you, love you, love you, love you, love you.